did not seem to matter to it. And so this Wahine, why, she grabbed that bird and it was just right in her fist. And as she looked in, there was this little beak and it opened up and it tweeted, but it tweeted the same language as the Wahine.
Mm.
And it said, please, please give me my freedom. Give me my peace. I have to have it no matter what. Well, the Wahine looked down at the bird and said, why should I give you your maluhia, your peace, your freedom? I have you in my fist. You are magic, I can tell. And that small, small bird, she tweeted back up, please, please, I will give you 3 pieces of wisdom, and then you can let me go. Well, this Wahine, wisdom was so important to her and her family. And so she said, give me those 3 pieces of wisdom first, and then I shall decide if I should release you or not. Well, that small, small, teeny tiny bird tweeted up in their language, the first piece of wisdom I would give you is do not regret what has already happened. Oh, thought the Wahine. Yes, that is wise. And the second? And the small bird tweeted, ah, do not long for what you cannot have. Ah, yes, that is wise, said the Wahine. And the third? What is the third? Ah, that tiny bird finally tweeted up, do not believe in what is impossible. The Wahine knew this was all so important, and what could she do but release that bird? And that beautiful yellow-winged bird with the black beak flew high, high, high up to where the coconut tree was. And on the tallest branch, that teeny tiny bird opened its wings and flapped and laughed. Truly, that was the easiest freedom you could have ever given me. Well, the Wahine did not quite know what she meant by that. Please explain. Well, you released me so freely and yet did not realize that I have a diamond as large as your fist in me. Please, little bird, please fly down to me again with among my beautiful plumerias, for I have much to offer you. You know winter is on its way. Even here, the food is scarce when winter comes, and in my garden, I will take care of you. Please fly down, be with me. Tweeted that little bird. You have forgotten all 3 of the pieces of wisdom I gave you. Did I not say do not regret what has already happened? Yes, you have said that. And yet I am free. I have my malu here, my freedom. And I would die to not have it. I will never come back to you. And the second piece of wisdom I gave you, do not regret what has already happened. Ha! It is obvious you have, for I will not be coming back. And the third, do not believe what is impossible. You saw me. You see my body. I am but a wee bird. How can I have a diamond as large as your fist in me? And that beautiful yellow-winged bird flew off far, far away. And that Wahine, she thought, She had much to learn, much wisdom to learn, and off she walked, trying to remember each one of those pieces of wisdom.
Yay.
Mahalo.
Thanks, Sue. Did I mention that Sue grew up in, thank you. Sue grew up in Hawaii. So all of those beautiful Hawaiian words that you heard are legitimately her own. And she raises plumarias at her house in Bulverde. So all of those things kind of fit with her story about herself. So Sue, thank you so much for sharing that story. Our next storyteller is brand new to us. She came to our first hybrid meeting last month. Her name is Bonnie B. Don't you love it? Don't you love it? And she went to a storytelling workshop at the library downtown and heard about us or knew about us. And she came back tonight with 3 friends and a story. So you can't beat that. Bonnie.
I was really excited to bring this story to you guys, and for those of you who have already experienced it, thanks for listening to it again. And so this is a little story about how I recently came to a parent in Santa. Underneath the fluorescent lights with the beeping heart monitor in the background, I held my newborn baby girl in my arms. And looking at her in her pink and blue hospital issued cap and swaddle, as I looked into her eyes, I felt nothing but love. I was 19 at the time, and I was completely unprepared to be a mother. And I had never wanted children, but when my high school boyfriend, her father, told me that it was going to be okay, I believed him. But when he nearly missed the birth, I knew he really wasn't going to be much help. So, nevertheless, I was really committed to being the best mother that I could be. I had a vision of who my daughter would grow up to be and what my life would look like after being a teen mom. And so I did all the things that a good mother does. I took her to church on Sundays. I volunteered in her classroom from preschool through high school. I had her enrolled in Girl Scouts, sports, competition dance, and competition cheer. And we read novels together every night, including The Secret Garden, Charlotte's Web, and of course, the Harry Potter series. I was committed to doing this right because not only did I want her to have the opportunities in life that I didn't have, I knew that my eventual freedom from parenthood relied on it. And I was really looking forward to figuring out who I was outside of being just a mom once this was over. So without her dad in the picture, it was hard to make ends meet, and I had to choose between my career, being a mother, and I was also very lonely. I didn't fit in with other parents because they were all older than me, and people my age, they just didn't have kids. And I'm not even going to tell you guys about dating. But as she got older, if you're a parent, you know how much hard work it is. And there are many days that just feel thankless. And we have few moments that we really get to celebrate our accomplishments as parents. So when she graduated in 2020 and accepted her diploma, wearing a green cap and gown with her face covered by a mask, and only myself, her best friend, and her boyfriend by her side, it was really disappointing. But that night, at home, as I laid in bed reading a book, she came into my room with her gray hoodie over her head, and she climbed into my arms into the exact same position that she was that I held her on that first day of her life. And I was overcome with emotion. I began sobbing and crying, and I rocked her, and I said, my baby. And she looked up at me and she goes, awkward. But I was having a moment. You know, I was almost at this finish line, and this hard work of being a single parent was almost over. So a couple months later, when she told me that she was pregnant 1 week after her 18th birthday, I was beyond devastated. I felt as though I had completely failed as a parent. And not only was she going to be doomed to the same loneliness and hardship that I had just experienced for the past 18 years, I wasn't ready to be a parent. I wanted my freedom. I wanted to figure out who I was outside of being just a mom. But thanks to God, a series of miracles unfolded over the next few months, and she got married. Her husband got an amazing job that actually paid for them to relocate from California to Texas, and they bought a house right next to her father's very large Mexican family. And I felt a sense of relief knowing she was going to have all the support that she needed, and my freedom was restored. So, but as I sat alone at my house in California by myself, an unexpected anxiety and depression came over me. And I couldn't understand why, because this was what I had been waiting for 20 years. But without my daughter around, I felt like I didn't really know where I was supposed to be or what exactly I was supposed to be doing. And I had never been an adult without being a mom. And I didn't feel free. I felt lost. So on Christmas Day of 2021, when I found myself back in the hospital underneath the fluorescent lights with the heart monitor beeping in the background, holding another newborn baby, wearing the same cap and swaddle that apparently never gets updated, I looked into her eyes and I realized that what I really needed was not my freedom, but family. And who I am wasn't like somewhere out there to be found. Who I was had been cultivated over the past 20 years without me even noticing. And I am more than just a mom. I'm a grandmother.
You know, whoops, here I go again. I don't have my computer to be able to tell those of you on Zoom that you're coming up next, but I will be alternating back and forth between live and Zoom. I mean, not that Zoom isn't alive, but so maybe narrowing it down, you'll get, so Chester, you're gonna be next. But in the meantime, I wanna thank Judy, Bonnie, I'm sorry. I was thinking that when you came tonight and you told a story, well, we'll get to know you. But I didn't think we'd get to know you so well. That was just a wonderful tale, and we appreciate your sharing it with us. And it was a sort of a deep dive into a new friendship. So thank you very much. Chester Wings. Whoops, here I go. See, I keep wanting this to be intimate and to move closer, but I'm just too tall to move much closer out of the bush. Our next story is Sergeant Chester of the Yukon. Or maybe it's Chester of Yukon, Oklahoma. Is that better? Chester is a member of the Territory Tellers and has been probably forever, probably since it began. He's been president and other officers of it. And he's also a member of TSA, Tejas Storytelling Association, where we get to have breakfast with Chester and Velma in the hotel every morning and get to know them a little bit too. But he's brought us a story tonight. At breakfast, we kind of talk about what happened yesterday at the festival, or who told, or who we liked. But today he's gonna be one of our highlights of the season. Chester?
Well, thank you. I don't ever remember being a highlight before. Hey, Mary Grace, you look like you're floating on air when you bounce back and forth like that. It's kind of cool. So, hey, this is a little short one. I hope I haven't done it. I don't think I've done it before because it's fairly new. But a few weeks ago, I was reading in the paper, a local paper, and this lady had an article about attitude. And I thought, I emailed her and said, look, in your article, there's a little story, and I'd like to steal your story and tell it in some story thing one of these days. And she said, well, I stole it from somebody else. I don't even remember where I got it. So, you know, you're not really stealing it from me. So this is the little story I want to tell you about attitude. There was this lady who was always known for being such a positive attitude all the time. Wonderful lady. Well, she noticed that her hair was starting to fall out. And she got up one morning and she went in to fix herself up like she normally does. And she looked in the mirror and all her hair had fallen out except for 3 hairs. And she looked in the mirror and she said, well, I think I'll braid them today. And she did, and she went out and she had a great day. Next morning she wakes up, goes in, does her normal getting ready for the world type deal. She looks in the mirror and yeah, one hair has fallen out. She now has 2 hairs on her head. And she looks in the mirror and she says, well, I think I'll part them down the middle today. And she does that and she goes out and she has a wonderful day. Next day she goes out and yeah, you've guessed it. She looks in the mirror and there's just 1 hair left. She looks in the mirror and I think I'll wear a ponytail today. And she does that and she goes out and she has a wonderful day. The next day, she gets up, she goes in to fix her hair, and that 1 lone hair is gone. She looks in the mirror and she says, well, I don't have to fix my hair today. And she goes on and she has a wonderful day. And so thank you for allowing me to be part of your evening event.
Well, Chester, could you hear the chuckles going on around here? Is she?
Well, I could a little bit, and I was watching the screen here. And of course, every time I watch Kuntz, she's always laughing or doing something. So that's a pretty good deal. And so anyway, yes, it was nice. Thank you very much. I appreciate what you guys do down there.
Oh,
And one of these days, I'm actually going to try to go to Texas. Who knows? That might down south. That just might be kind of fun to show up live.
We'd like that. We'd like that.
But you're a long ways.
We are. Yeah, San Antonio is pretty far into Texas. So, well, our next storyteller is another new storyteller who also went to a storytelling workshop at the library. And he is also a musician. So, oh, come on in. Come on in. We're glad to have you. We'd love to have more people than chairs. And we're just about there. His name is Nathan Barrera, and he said he was invited to join us tonight, but we're not sure who invited him. So we just wanted, oh, it was Bonnie. She's confessing. I was going to say thank you to the anonymous inviter. The anonymous inviter is Bonnie, who you just heard. Nathan?
Thank you so much. So I guess like rule thirds.
I can raise it too if you need to.
2 for Jimmy. So like I've been writing for a while. Not everything has been good. But this one is getting after a number of years, getting some people listening to it. Not necessarily from my voice, which is a good thing, as the vocal coach will tell you. But it was based on, first of all, like, experiences of romance, but also on this whole Buddhist idea of having a vase. Imagine a vase, so it's very beautiful and delicate and fragile, and you're admiring it, and you're just, oh my God, it's so lovely. And as you're doing so, you accidentally knock it over, and it busts into a million pieces. And then snap, it's all back together. If you could like love it the way you did after it was broken, before it's broken, I think is the goal of the maxim or parable. So I kind of made it's a country song based on that idea. You didn't think I could do it. The Kerrville Folk Festival, a friend of mine is singing the song, and it's many of his own. It's Nick Sliker, and it's called Representation. But the song's called Miss Me While I'm Here. I won't see you soon, but I'll see you when I can. We can't stop my party. We can sure understand the distance brings longing the tears. Make believe I'm absent. Miss me while I'm here. Won't you miss me while I'm still here? Don't wait until I'm gone. Show me care soon that highway end in my head. So love me like a widow. Miss me while pulling me away, but your touch is all I need. Make me want to stay, so don't you hesitate before it's too late. Just make believe I'm absent. Hold me close today. Won't you miss me while I'm still here? Don't wait till I'm gone. Show me you care soon that highway wind in my head. So love me like a widow. Miss me
Run like widow, miss me while John did me a great favor. He put a box under the camera over here. So if I wonder a little bit, I may still be on your scope. Judy, I'm going to call on you next. Nathan, thank you so much. Western maybe, but universal. We've been there.
Hi.
Judy, are you waving? Yeah. Judy's one of our distant SASA members. She was a newspaper reporter and an editor for a quarter of a century. And then she wrote other people's stories. And now she gets to tell her own story. So, and we love them. We've heard several of them. And they're set in northern Appalachia. And they're so thoroughly researched. If you haven't been to Appalachia, you still know they're true. You still know that's the way things are. And that's the reporter side of her doing that. But Judy's also surprised us with some traditional folk tales. So not sure what she's going to do tonight, but you'll be glad.
Thank you, Mary Grace. Well, I'm going to try my hand at some singing. Oh, raccoon's tail got a ring around, possum's tail is bare. Rabbit ain't got no tail at all, except a little bunch of hair. Now, when I was a little girl, my dad used to sing that song to me. And being a city kid, it was really handy because, well, I knew then that a raccoon's tail had a ring around it and a possum's tail was bare. We had rabbits, so I did know that they just had a little bitty bunch of hair. And as I got older, though, I started to wonder just why does a raccoon's tail have a ring around? And why is a possum's tail bare? And why does a rabbit just have a little bitty bunch of hair? Well, at a couple meetings ago, I told the rabbit part of the story. Tonight, I'm going to tell you the first part of the story. Well, a raccoon's tail got a ring around. Raccoon was walking through the woods one beautiful summer morning, and he was on his way to Aunt Pip Sissywah's house. He was going to help Auntie to shell some black walnuts because she was making a wool blanket. Now, you say, what does a wool blanket have to do with black walnuts? Well, Auntie had spun some beautiful wool thread that she was going to weave into her blanket, and it was a beautiful cream color, but Auntie wanted to have some nice dark brown stripes in her blanket. And the way she would get those stripes is if she dyed some of that wool thread dark brown. Well, back in those days, folks just didn't go to the store and get a box of RIT dye. They had to make their own dye. And one way they made dark brown dye was to boil black walnut shells. And everyone knows the black walnut shells are a tough nut to crack. So Raccoon was going to help her. And he was really hoping that after they were done, they could take the black walnut meat and make some cookies. And they were his absolute favorite. Well, as Raccoon was walking through the woods, he sniffed the air and he could smell black walnuts cooking. And when he got to her cabin, he knocked on the door and she yelled, "Come on in, the latch string's out." So Raccoon walked into the cabin, and there on her wood stove was a big pot of water boiling with some black walnut shells in it. "Oh, I'm sorry, Raccoon," she said. I got ahead of myself and I wanted to go ahead and get these things started. So, well, there they are on the wood stove. And I just remembered that I have to take some butter down to the general store this morning to trade for some thread. And you just can't turn off a wood stove. So would you watch that pot of boiling shells and take it off when it's just the right shade? Well, sure, Auntie Raccoon said, "I'd be happy to." So Auntie put her shawl around her shoulders and put on her bonnet and picked up the basket with the butter in it. And as she went out the door, she says, "Now I'll be back directly." So Raccoon was standing there looking at that boiling pot of black walnut shells. And he figured that Auntie would have left him a scrap of material to dip in to test the dye to see if it was the right color, because he knew what color she wanted. But he looked around the cabin and he couldn't find anything. what was he going to do? Well, then he had an idea. He thought, I'll dip my tail in and see how dark it is. Now, Raccoon has asked me to tell you to never touch anything that's cooking on the stove. Never put your finger or any other body part into anything that's cooking on the stove because you'll get burned. This is just for the story. So Raccoon dipped his tail in. When he brought it out, there was a beautiful dark ring around his tail. He looked at it and thought, well, that's not quite dark enough. So he let it cook a little bit longer. Then he dipped his tail in again, and it came out with another dark ring. Almost. So he let it go a wee bit longer. And finally, he dipped his tail in one more time, and it was just right. So Raccoon went over to the stove and pulled that big pot of boiling black walnut shells off the wood stove, just as Aunt Pip Sissy-Wah came home. Oh, Raccoon, Raccoon, I'm so sorry. I forgot to leave you some scraps to test the dye, but what is that on your tail? Well, Auntie, he said, I know you didn't leave me anything to test the dye with, so I dipped my tail in. She said, but Raccoon, that won't come out. That's really strong dye. He says, I know, and I think I'd like it. In fact, I have 3 nice rings on my tail. Oh, goodness, Aunt Pip Sissy-Wah said. Well, I thank you, Raccoon, for your help. And you know, we have all that black walnut meat left. Let's make some cookies. And that's what they did. And that is why, to this day, a raccoon's tail got a ring around, possum's tail is bare, rabbit ain't got no tail at all, except a little bunch of hair. The end. Thank you.
Oh, Judy, that was fun. Don't you like the variety of stories we get to hear every month? You know, I have to say that the Texas version of that song is not nearly as melodically sophisticated as your version. We used to sing, rabbit ain't got no tail at all, tail at all, tail at all. Rabbit ain't got no tail at all, just a powder puff. But it is kind of neat to see, you know, how universal some of those kinds of things are.
They've traveled.
Yes, they travel and they kind of reinvent themselves when people forget how it went. So that's probably all those GTT people, gone to Texas people from Appalachia, brought it with them to the best of their memory. Our next storyteller is also new to us, and he was also here last month. I just think we're having little miracles around here with so many visitors who come back with a story right away. This fellow's name is Gary Tallman, and he told us a little story last time too. Yeah, he just kind of stepped right up and told a story. And so tonight we had a little more warning, and here he is, Gary Tallman.
Thank you. Am I standing in a good place? It looks like it. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you very much. I'm calling my story, What's in the Bag? And just to let you guys know, I will be singing later in the story. Now, this story takes place in 1992 when I was 34 years old. I mention that because I was a late bloomer in life. I did not have a lot of dates. So what I would do is I had a bad habit. I used to buy tickets for events like musicals and plays and concerts, and then scamper to try to get a date. That didn't always work that way. So I wound up having to bribe some friends to go, guy friends. One time I even enticed my therapist to go with me. True story. I had gotten tickets for George Burns and John Denver when the movie Oh God came out. I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember that movie, but some of you are. So my therapist and I went, but that's a story for another time. Let's go back to 1992. And I bought tickets for a show called The Real Live Brady Bunch. Everybody watched the Brady Bunch, right? But what they did was they came up with a campy version of it, and they put it on the theater. And it turned out that the actors that played Mr. and Mrs. Brady wound up becoming famous. They were Jane Lynch played Mrs. Brady, and Andy Richter played Mr. Brady. So, but I don't think any of the kids became famous from that show. Anyway, I bought tickets in the living room section. What they did was they took out a bunch of rows of seats in the theater, and they laid down carpet. And then they had couches and pillows and rugs. And they invited people to even come in their pajamas to the show. So now I needed to find a date. I had these tickets in the living room section. I'm all excited. And a friend of a friend wanted to go. I had barely ever known this woman. It was like a blind date. Her name was Jackie, and she was quite a bit younger than me. But she agreed to go, so I was very happy. So it was a sweltering Sunday matinee show in at the Westwood Playhouse near UCLA. And we had gone out to lunch, so now we arrive at the theater, only to find out that the air conditioning was broken. So it was really super hot in that theater. And we found a place on the carpet to sit. I had to sit cross-legged because there was no room to stretch out my legs. So we got there early and they were playing 70s music. And then they announced that they were going to have this other show before the Brady Bunch show. And it was audience participation. They were going to take several people from the audience, put them on stage, and put them through some different stunts. And after every round, somebody was going to be eliminated. So I wanted to impress this Jackie. So I was determined to get on this game show. They called it the Real Live Game Show. I don't know how they came up with it. But so they passed out cards. And you had to write down on your card something funny that might get them to kind of notice you. So I had already lost my hair by then. And I always like to say, I'm not really bald. My hair and I had a falling out. I know that's a groaner, but it gets a laugh. So anyway, that got their attention. And sure enough, they called my name to go up on stage. So I'm thinking, this is great, right? The thing is, I had been sitting cross-legged for so long that my feet had fallen asleep. And I have to navigate and traverse a path up to the stage. And I'm like, whoa, banging into walls and all that stuff, stepping on people's toes. I finally make it to the stage, my God. And then there's a big spotlight. So now I start sweating, like sweating bullets, as they say, right? And it's really warm up there. And then we had to introduce ourselves. And then they gave us our first stunt, okay? They had us choose a pair of headphones at random. Put the headphones on when it was your turn. Then somebody would click a switch and play a song. And you had to sing a cappella because the audience was not hearing the music. I just had to sing. So by the luck of the draw, guess what song I get? Like a Virgin by Madonna. So with apologies to Nathan, I'm going to sing the first couple like a virgin, like a virgin. That's all I knew. And I got eliminated. I didn't know. So I walk off the stage and they hand me a brown paper bag. And I take the bag and I go down and I find Jackie and I sit down again. And now we're just sitting there watching the rest of the contestants and so on and so forth. And then they have an intermission. So like I said, I'm sweating all over the place. I'm really hot. I can't wait to go to the bathroom. I start to get up and Jackie said, "What's in the bag?" So I open up the bag and I start rummaging through it. And there was like a pen that maybe was a flashlight. There were some coupons. And then I reach into the bag and I pull out one of these, a wash and dry. I call them wash and dries, a moist towelette. And I'm so happy to find this. I'm thinking, you guys have an idea what's going on? I think you're ahead of me. I'm thinking the people at the show knew that it was so hot that they were going to supply a wash and dry for me. I open it up and I start dabbing my head. Right? And Jackie looks at me like the most quizzical look on her face ever. And she says, "You do know what that is, right?" It was a condom. Oh, you were right. Okay. I was worried I was going to offend somebody. It was a condom. So we finished watching this show. I drove Jackie home, and that was the last I ever saw Jackie. Now, that was 31 years ago, right? I'm wondering how many times she's told this story. I'm just trying to catch up, you know? Thank you very much.
That was a fabulous story. Thank you so much. I keep not looking at the camera. I know I'm supposed to look at the camera, not at y'all in the top row over there. So let's see. I wrote this down and then forgot. Deborah, I'm gonna ask you to tell next, but in the meantime, I do want to thank Gary again for this wonderful, hilarious story. And
Unfortunately, I'm out of stories now.
been there, done that, so we all understand. Pam, I know a little bit about you because you're on the storytelling listserv. Deborah, I'm sorry. Pam is there too, right? I get reading. I do know a little bit about you though from you're from Colorado. Is that right? Pam is. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, that's the little bit that I know. So if you would like to tell us a couple of sentences about yourself before you get going, I will allow you to do that.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. I have family who lives in San Antonio.
Oh,
And yeah, and so I haven't been there back in a while. COVID interrupted a lot of travel. I am Deborah Weller. I currently live in St. Augustine, Florida. I am on the board of directors of the Tale Tellers of St. Augustine and also the Florida Storytelling Association. I love performing live, of course, but I love visiting and coming into other storytelling groups just to find out who's out there in the storytelling world. So I am grateful to be here tonight. I'm going to tell you a story from Slovenia.
wow.
It is called The Legend of the Dandelion. Now, in a field where spring was just starting to awaken everything, there was a little seed. That little seed was down in the earth. And as the days got warmer, it began to sprout its roots. And then a little green sprout pushed its way up, up, up into the soil. And little green leaves appeared. And a bud on top of that sprout. The little sprout felt quite nice. Oh, I love this world that I'm in now. One morning, an angel came down from heaven and looked at the little sprout and said, "Little sprout, it's time for you to choose a name for yourself. What kind of flower are you going to be? Because I have to go and report to God." Well, I don't know. I don't know what kind of flower I want to be yet. I haven't even got a bud on me, but I don't have any idea of what I'm going to look like. Can you give me some time? I will come back tomorrow because our Father in heaven is expecting an answer. Oh, I'll be sure to give one. I'll be sure to give one. So that afternoon, the little bud looked up into the sky. I see the sun. I would like to be as yellow as the sun. Later on that evening, The little bud looked up into the night sky and saw the glowing white moon. I want to be as white as the moon. And then she saw the stars in the heavens. Oh, could I please travel through the sky like the stars? I know what I want to be now. And she rested for the evening. Just as promised, the angel came back. Well, do you know what you want to be so you can be named? I do. I know exactly what I want to be. I want to be yellow, a starburst of yellow. And I also want to be white, like the beautiful moonlight. And if I could I please travel through the skies like a star? Well, I'm not so sure about this one, but I'll go back to our Father in heaven and ask him. And so the angel went back and stood before our Maker. And the Maker said, we shall call this one Dandelion. Return to earth and bless that bud with its new name. The angel went down to earth, and the little bud was waiting excitedly, but hadn't opened up yet, waiting for its name. And the angel said, I bless you, little bud, with the name of Dandelion. And the dandelion opened up at that moment and was as yellow as the sun in its petals. In a few more days, the dandelion became white, a white ball like the moon. And in a short time later, a little child was walking through the field and picked that dandelion white ball of fluff and made a wish and blew upon the dandelion. And the dandelion's wish came true, for now it traveled all over little seed pods, just like the stars in the night sky. And when it landed upon the earth, it slept for the seasons, all through the hot summer, all through fall, and all through winter, until at last, when spring came again, it burst through the earth and blossomed once more. And perpetually now, the dandelions grow. We may think them as weeds, but they were blessed with a name from God.
Oh, thank you. I always wanted to be yellow too. So. I didn't think the consequences of being yellow would be that I would then turn white and be blown all over the place. If you are on the Zoom, you probably know that down along the side of the chat, people send you little notes that say something they liked about your story or something like that. But I hope that if you're on Zoom, you can also hear us here when we're laughing at something you say or applauding, or I guess you could probably hear applause or smiling. You'll just have to take it for granted that your stories make us happy. Our next storyteller is Susan Whipple. Susan has been a part of San Antonio Storytellers for a good long time, and we've heard her tell a lot of personal stories about growing up in New York, or something that happened at the nursery that she and her husband Charlie used to have, and we've more lately it seems like we've been hearing a lot of folk tales or traditional literary tales. She just has branched out and kind of covered the world with all different kinds of stories. And so let's see what she has to tell us tonight.
Thank you, Mary Grace. Looks like I've come full circle because it's another personal story. And it's not about me, it's about my mother. Because last month, being Mother's Day, I didn't tell a story. And I decided it wasn't so long ago, I can tell one today. And Bonnie, you told about your daughter, this one's going to be about my mother. Mothers, we all think of them so fondly. It's the way of the world. My mother was loving and caring. She reached out to everybody to be helpful, to do what she could. Family, friends, neighbors. And she never expected anything in return. It was just what she did. She was also a keen observer of human nature. And every now and then I get to thinking about some of the things that she used to say. When my brother was a teenager, goofing off, getting terrible grades in high school, my mother got a call from school one day and asked if she would come in for a discussion. Well, she went in, and by that evening, there was another discussion at home with Mother, Dad, and my brother. And at the end of that discussion, she faced him and she held him on his shoulders and she said, "You will apply yourself. You will do all of your work. I will not permit you to fail." And he never did. Another time, a couple she knew and my dad knew were having marital problems. Mutual friend came over and said, "You know, things are really terrible, and you and I have to help them get a divorce." So my mother fixed her with her look that later became famous and said, "I don't help people get a divorce. I would much rather help them stay together." To parents of young children, she would say, "Tell your sons that they're handsome. Tell your daughters that they're beautiful. But tell them both that they're smart." And if she was talking with a friend about the state of the country or the families or the neighborhood or whatever, she would often end the conversation by saying, "It's a great life if you don't weaken." Always succinct, always to the point. But she had a very difficult childhood. Her parents were immigrants, hardly could speak English, struggled to support the family. She had a tyrannical father, and she was the youngest of 8 children. We didn't hear too many stories of her growing up, but there was one story she did tell us about when she was about 2 years old, just a little toddler. And it must have been a weekend, it was summertime, all the windows in the apartment were open, and the whole family was there, and they were finishing up from last week's work week and getting ready for next week's work week, and they were talking and cooking and ironing and doing chores, and chattering around. And they didn't notice this little girl toddling over to the window that was open to the summer breeze. She climbed up on the windowsill and she fell out 2 stories to a concrete yard. Fortunately, her fall was broken by the clotheslines that were running from one house, one building to another. And there were many tenement houses bordering this courtyard. Well, my grandmother raced her to the hospital. There was only one hospital in New York that would care for poor people who couldn't afford the care. It was Bellevue Hospital, very well known, very good hospital. But it was also known to be the psychiatric hospital of last resort, and also where they sent the criminally insane. And so my brother and I had a picnic with that one. Through the years, we kept on saying, "Oh yeah, it's because you were in Bellevue." But she didn't have any broken bones, and she didn't apparently have any other physical problems from it. And she grew up fine, except for one thing, and that one thing was that she was forever afraid of heights. Well, when I was a young girl, my family lived in Brooklyn on the 5th floor of an apartment building. And we kids used to go out and spend the day outside. We didn't want to come back in no matter what. But we bought a little snack once in a while, or another little something. So the kids would, whichever child it was, would stand beneath their window, however high or low it was, and they'd call out, "Ma, Ma." And those of you who are parents know that a mother always hears her own child. So they'd open the window and they'd lean out, and the kid would say something like, "Send me down a piece of bread and butter." And mother would go in the kitchen, she'd butter the bread, put it in a wax bag because we didn't have plastic. And she'd lean out again and toss it. That was fine. Every mother did that, except mine, because she was afraid of heights. Well, if I wanted something, I'd call her up and I'd ask for what I wanted, and she'd get it ready, and she would stand there while I was telling her. She didn't lean out, of course. And when she had it all ready, she would take it and she would go, and there it was. Well, years passed, and I had a family of my own. And I lived in Rochester, New York. And one time we decided we would go to Niagara Falls. It was only a half-day's drive, and we had never been there. And everybody says how beautiful it was. So we went, and it was beautiful. But also our friends told us that it was important to go to the Canadian side because the view was much prettier from there. And we did, and it was wonderful. So we did a few touristy things. We went on a boat called the Maid of the Mist, which goes from one end of the falls past the Horseshoe Falls where it's rounded, and then to the other, and it chugs along through that current of the falling water. And we had raincoats they gave us, but we still got a little wet. And it was wonderful. It was great because we got to see it up close. Another thing we did was called the Journey Behind the Falls, where again we put on raincoats and we went down this long, dim hallway that must have been blasted out of solid rock behind the Horseshoe Falls. And we got to a big area. It was wider than that screen. It was probably twice as big that was cut out of the rock. And beyond it was the falls crashing in, falling in, just on and on and on without any change. And it was thick, you couldn't see through it. You just heard the roaring of it. And after a while, I began to feel hypnotized. But at that same time, I was aware of the force and the power of Mother Nature. And I still have that respect to this day. You hear of people who are asked to evacuate from their homes because there's a hurricane or tornadoes or floods or volcano eruptions, and everybody leaves except a few people. Why don't they leave? They say, "Well, I've been living here all my life. I've been through all these storms. I ain't going nowhere." And what happens? They die. Well, there was one more thing that we did that was perfect for tourists. Our friends told us about going somewhere in the nighttime after the sunset. There was a building, I don't know how many floors it was. It had to be at least 8. And they said, you go up to the building and the rooftop affords you a wonderful view of the night waterfall. And so and they light it up with flood lamps, sometimes just white, sometimes with all the colors. So we went up there, and it was just a plain, ordinary roof, you know, with tar and pebbles and whatnot, except for 2 things. Around the whole perimeter, there was a fence. And in the very center, there was a phone booth. We looked at each other and we said, let's go home. And we got the long distance operator. We called home. We got my mom and dad, and each one spoke on a different extension of the phone. And we said, guess what? Guess where we are? We're at Niagara Falls. And my dad said, oh, that's wonderful. Tell me about it. And we went on and on and on for a while. And then it was my mother's turn. And what do you think she said? She said, please, don't stand by the edge. Of course. Thank you.
John, I think you told me you had a small story for us, and it's a story that requires a hat, so it must be a great one.
Okay, thank you.
So many years ago, about 70 years ago, a group of 12 and 13-year-old boys found a dusty old handbook in one of the old men that passed away in his things. And it was a scout book. They thumbed through it, and it was all kinds of great survival ideas and things you could do, build a fire. And they wanted to make a scout troop. And so they asked some of the men in the neighborhood if they would be their scout leader. And they said, no, you boys, you're ranch boys. This is for city boys. You don't need that. You guys in the summer head off into the mountains with your horses and your mules with all your materials. You don't need this scout handbook. You don't need a scout troop. Well, the boys decided to make a scout troop anyways. And they gave some money to one of the men that went to town, and he went to the army store that had all the old clothing items and bought backpacks, bought them some clothing that they could wear, and those summer shorts that the military wear, boots. And when they came back, they all dressed the same, and they learned all these things out of their scout handbook. And they would march around like soldiers, and they had a lot of fun doing that. And then one year, it was wonderful. The scout district of the area asked the local church if they could use their church camp, which used to be a family camp, but they donated it to the church. And so there was this grassy spot with a creek going through it. And the scout district thought it would be perfect for a scout jamboree. So the scouts were all excited, and these local boys said, great, we're gonna go to the scout jamboree and be with other scouts. So that day, they got in line and they were marching down the street. It was a couple miles to the family camp. And while they were going, they saw other Boy Scouts, and they were marching, but they had their Boy Scout uniforms on. They had Boy Scout hats on, they had their patches and their numbers, and they were all decked out. Well, they felt good because they were all in unison, but they didn't have those patches. When they got over the hill and they saw that jamboree set out at the camp, it was wonderful. They were all in line, they had their tents separated, each unit, and they had the area where they had the fire pit in the middle, and the benches around made out of logs, and lots of extra wood that they had prepared so they could have a big bonfire. There was another area that was set up for all the food that they were going to be preparing for all the scouts. And they were excited because they were going to be able to participate in the scouts. And they went up to the front, and there the quartermaster unit, there was a sign, go through the records, and they said, who are you guys? And they said, we are the 101st, right there, we're the Eagles. And they said, we don't have you on our reservations. Which unit are you with? We're the 101st. Okay, but are you guys Boy Scouts? And he pulled out the scout handbook. He said, look right here, we got the scout handbook. And you know what? They shooed him away. They didn't have any adult supervision, and they were not official scouts on the record. These boys, they marched back to town and kept their line formation. When they got there, the older boys, they saw them being so sad. And they said, what's wrong? Why are you guys so sad? They said, they tell us we're not real scouts, so we can't participate in the jamboree. And those 17, 18-year-old boys, they kind of conniving. So, okay. So when night fell and got to be dark, those older boys snuck back towards that camp. Up the street, they opened up a gate that had the cattle. And they quietly rounded up the cattle, about 50 head, and started moving them down that road. And when they got to where the scout jamboree camp was, they opened up that gate. All of a sudden, they made a bunch of noise, and they got those cattle running, and they ran right into that camp, and they were knocking over tents, and they were pulling the poles down, and the ropes for the dining area. Everything was all a mess, and cattle were running everywhere. We need to remember to include others, even if it doesn't look like they belong. Maybe we can find a way to put it in. Otherwise, ways like those will take action, and you don't want that action. But I'll tell you what happened the next year when they asked if they could use the church camp for a jamboree. They made a special VIP invitation to the boys of that church. Even though they were not scouts, they were invited to the jamboree.
Thank you. And that was the last cattle drive. Well, we have done just wonderfly on our timing as it turned out. I was a little worried about, were we all gonna get to hear all the stories we deserve to hear? But I think we did. Your stories tonight were just absolutely wonderful. And we're so glad you came. We're glad we had plenty of new visitors to fill up all these chairs and plenty of folks on Zoom. This was just a real exciting evening, wasn't it? Well, thank you. This is our second successful hybrid. Thank you. I needed that word. Hybrid meeting, and we're just delighted. And they're going to just keep going on and on. So some more people want to come back with stories. First story, second, third stories, whatever you have. We're looking forward to our meeting in July.